I swore the days were over, courting empty dreams. I worshipped at the altar, losing everything. And the God I held together is losing all its shape. And in my head you look so gorgeous, it's keeping me awake. There's a scar on my soul, so let me down easy. Break my heart sweetly, like you always do. I guess I can't let go till you wreck me completely. Break my heart sweetly, drape me in blue.
In this video, we're going to take a closer look to workers' compensation insurance. Again, that's what the class is about. This is just an introduction to workers' compensation insurance. Throughout the semester, we will build on a lot of the topics introduced in this unit. Remember, in our first unit, it covered different types of insurance in general. Insurance is an important part of a company's financial success. Workers' compensation is an important part of all the different insurance products that companies need to have. It's also a legal requirement. Companies that hire employees have to provide workers' compensation coverage. So let's go ahead and get started. I mentioned this before, but let me mention it again. If you go back 15 years, this was not a required class in our program. But several students, after they graduated and they were working as safety managers, they realized that they had to deal a lot with workers' compensation insurance, manage the claims, and so on. They, communicating back to the program, suggested that we have a class just focusing on workers' compensation insurance. That's why we have this class, because you will be, especially if you end up on the safety side of the major, maybe not so much on the environmental side, but if you end up working as a safety manager with your degree, you will be working with workers' compensation insurance. And as I mentioned in the first unit, several different types of insurances perhaps will be at least partly your responsibility to manage those different insurance products. Now, the study of workers' compensation is not just a safety management thing. Workers' compensation, the study of workers' compensation, actually the practice of of workers' compensation also falls over into the legal and medical fields as well. As a safety manager, when you're working with a workers' compensation case, you probably will be working with legal professionals as well. Definitely will be working with medical professionals, not just doctors, but nurses, physical therapists, physician's assistants, along with doctors. You will be working with them, collaborating with them in the management of a workers' compensation case. And one warning I want to share with you, and I share this in most of my classes, remember that we are not doctors and we are not attorneys/lawyers. We are safety managers. So we need to know our limits. When things start getting too technical from a legal standpoint or too technical from a medical standpoint, we need to get the other professionals involved. when it comes to medical issues, we don't want to be diagnosing injuries, illnesses. We don't want to be suggesting treatment. That's beyond the scope of what we do as safety managers. Minor first aid, covering up a cut, cleaning a wound, that's different. But if we're talking about more serious disorders, more serious injuries, we need to defer to the medical professional. And I've seen a few safety managers in my career. You would think they were doctors the way they were talking and the way they were making recommendations to employees. And that's just setting yourself up for problems when you go beyond your area of expertise. That's why we have doctors, that's why we have attorneys, to deal with the more specific, more complex legal and medical issues that we face as safety managers. Multidisciplinary, you will be working with others when it comes to workers' compensation. Now, in our class, we are going to emphasize Oklahoma workers' compensation law. There is a specific state agency that oversees workers' compensation in the state of Oklahoma, and it's the Oklahoma Workers' Compensation Commission. And we will talk a lot about the Oklahoma Workers' Compensation Commission during the class. I'll talk a little bit more about it on the next slide. I'll actually open the link to their website, and I'll show you some of the resources available at their website. The actual name of the law that governs workers' comp in the state of Oklahoma is the Administrative Workers' Compensation Act. That is the name of the legal statute applicable to workers' compensation. Administrative Workers' Compensation Act. But most people just call it Title 85. Title 85 is the number of the law, number of the legislation. The law has been changed recently. It received a major upgrade in 2014. And since 2014, there have been some more minor changes along the way. The last published update was November 1st, 2020. There haven't been any changes since November 1st, 2020. Well, with one exception. There are benefits charts that show how much workers can be eligible for as far as the replacement of their lost wages. Those benefit charts are tied to the rate of inflation. They're tied to the average weekly salary in the state of Oklahoma, and they tend to change every year. They are upgraded each year. And later in the semester, we're going to have a unit where we talk about workers' compensation benefits in more detail, and we will look at the most current benefit charts. I've provided you with several resources on Blackboard, some reading materials. These first two reading materials, these first two documents, I want you to read. The Oklahoma Guide to Workers and the Oklahoma Guide to Employers. The Oklahoma Guide to Workers looks at workers' compensation law in the state of Oklahoma from the standpoint of the worker. What's of greatest interest to the worker? What does a worker need to know about the workers' comp system? Then the second one looks at it from the standpoint of employers. What do employers need to know about workers' comp law in the state of Oklahoma? Each of the documents is only about 10 pages in length. It does a great job of summarizing the essentials of workers' comp in Oklahoma. Much of what I will share with you in this unit and in other units is taken from these guides. So if you when you go ahead and read these guides, you'll get the gist of workers' comp in Oklahoma pretty well. If you would like a more thorough exploration of the workers' comp law, you can read Title 85. I make it available on Blackboard. It's optional. It's about, I believe it's 96 pages in length, which is kind of short for a law compared to some other laws that are out there. It's optional. If you would like a more detailed exploration, go ahead and take a look at the Title 85 document that's available on Blackboard. I also recommend, I'm going to show you the Workers' Compensation Commission website here in just a second, just very briefly. I also recommend you go ahead and take a look at the Workers' Compensation Commission website on your own. Just click some links, see what's available. And then if you do go ahead and explore the Workers' Compensation website and you have any questions, let me know. We will discuss a lot of the information available through this website throughout the semester. But let's go ahead and take a look at the website. And they're constantly changing this website. It is a lot better than it used to be. They have made some major improvements. Go ahead and fit this to my recording window here. And this is the homepage for the Workers' Compensation Commission. There are several links associated with each of these boxes. There are also links at the top, in the heading at the top. This is a link here, the legal, that we will explore. Here are the benefits charts that I mentioned. And don't worry, this is not going to be in your quiz. I'm just showing you what's available. Later in the semester, we will take a detailed look at the benefits charts. These benefit charts show us how much a worker is eligible to receive when they are injured and not able to work. What will their weekly indemnity payment be when they're not able to work? And again, you'll see all of the updates that have been made since 2014. So, yeah, just about every year except 2022, there wasn't. They skipped a year there. It looks like, but because of inflation, because of changes in the average weekly wage in the state of Oklahoma, those benefit charts are adjusted periodically, usually annually. Actually, these are the death benefit charts here, which we'll look at. These are the partial permanent disability charts. And this is showing all the charts back to 2014, which those 2014 charts, those aren't of interest really anymore. Yeah. Chrome has a mind of its own all of a sudden. But again, that's just a quick example of the types of information available from the Workers' Compensation Commission. It is a public commission. As citizens of the state, we have the right to be involved, in some of the meetings and request additional documentation and so on. Here's another link that we'll explore later, some of the different forms that need to be completed when there's a workers' compensation claim. And I don't know why that keeps clicking. I think when I close Google, it will, or maybe when I close this website, it will help. Again, read the guide to Workers' Comp Guide to Workers and the Workers' Comp Guide to Employers. And if that pops up again, I'm going to have to stop and get that fixed because that's irritating. Let's go ahead and move on. There it is. I'm going to go ahead and stop for a second, figure out what's going on, why I'm receiving this security alert, and then I'll come back and we'll talk in more detail. You kind of know what workers' comp is already, or you should, but if not, we will specifically define, describe, talk about the benefits that are associated with workers' compensation. I think I have the security alert problem fixed. So let's go ahead and look more closely at what workers' compensation is. And throughout the course, we're going to build upon everything discussed in this introduction. Workers' compensation is an insurance program with benefits for injured workers, but there are also benefits for employers as well. The way the program is set up, it's intended to be a fair system for both the workers and the employers. One term I want to define, you probably don't need this definition, but just in case, let's keep everybody on the same page. What do we mean by the term compensation? The term compensation refers to all the benefits provided to workers injured or killed at work. And the benefit wouldn't be to the dead worker, it would be to the dead workers' families. So there can be benefits to injured workers and to the surviving family members of a worker who is killed on the job. And the different types of compensation that are available. All medical bills, medical costs associated with the injury are covered. Rehabilitation, surgeries if necessary, everything is covered by workers' compensation insurance. The employee is not out any expenses when it comes to the medical bills associated with their workplace injuries. And that's one form of compensation. The next form of compensation are the indemnity payments. We talked about indemnity in the first units. The indemnity payments refer to the partial replacement of lost wages. And I say partial replacement of lost wages. I don't want to go into it in great detail now. But when a worker is injured and they receive indemnity payments, those payments, they're not going to get as much in those indemnity payments as they would normally earn if they were working. In Oklahoma, there's some caveats to this, some exceptions, and we will go into more detail on this in a later unit. But in Oklahoma, the indemnity payments for an injured worker are going to be 70% of what they would normally earn in a week. If a worker normally earns $500 a week, their indemnity payment is only going to be $350. If they earn $1,000 in a week, in an average week when they're working, their indemnity payment's only going to be $700. So there's this thought among some people that employees oftentimes will fake injury so they can get a paid vacation, so they can stay at home and get paid. Well, most employees can't afford to be on workers' compensation for an extended period of time because it's not their full wages. They're not receiving their full wages when they're on workers' compensation. So we got medical bills, indemnity payments, and death benefits to survivors. And there's several different types of death benefits that are available to surviving dependents. When a worker is killed, his spouse, his children, other dependents are eligible for different types of benefits, which we'll talk about in the benefits unit. Now, this partial replacement of lost wages, this applies to those circumstances, those cases where the worker is able to go back to work at full capacity. What we're talking about here are compensation payments for a permanent disability where the worker's never going to be 100% again. If they're totally disabled, they're going to receive weekly payments, or they could take a lump sum settlement. It could be a partial permanent disability. The worker can still work, but they can't do what they did before. There's going to be compensation for that circumstance, that type of case also. Again, all of this in greater detail in the benefits unit later in the semester. In some cases, the worker may be compensated with additional training or retraining. Maybe they were working in a manual labor position where a lot of wear and tear on the body, a lot of bending, stooping, lifting, carrying objects, a rigorous type of work. If they were involved in that type of work and they're injured, they may not be able to do that kind of work in the future, but they could do other types of work that weren't as physically demanding. That's what this retraining is for. Retrain the worker to do a job that's less physically demanding. And I've one example from my experience. We had a truck driver suffered a very serious back injury. He was not able to do the job after the injury that he was doing before the injury because of his physical limitations, but he could be retrained to do other types of work. He went to nursing school as part of his workers' compensation benefit package. He went to nursing school, became a nurse, and was able to work in the medical field. And nursing can be hard on the back too, but it wasn't what he ended up doing in the nursing field was not as physically demanding as what he was doing working as a truck driver for a construction company. So, again, these are the different types of compensation that are available to injured workers, and we'll talk more about them during the semester. Now, workers' compensation coverage is a legal requirement. The premiums for this coverage are paid by the employer. Employees there should not be a deduction from their paycheck to cover workers' compensation coverage. Some employers have tried that. They'll have a miscellaneous deduction from the employee's gross pay. That miscellaneous deduction is used to pay for the workers' compensation coverage. That's illegal. Employers can't do that. Employers have to pay for the cost of coverage. And again, it is a legal requirement. Most employers in most states are required to have this coverage. Now, it does vary from state to state. There are some exceptions. Small companies, less than 3 or 4 employees, may not be required to carry workers' compensation coverage. Family-owned and operated businesses may not be required to carry coverage. Agricultural businesses, depending on the size, the scope of the business, they may not be required. Now, if we look at specific states, Texas is kind of an outlaw or an outlier when it comes to workers' compensation coverage. Texas does not require employers to carry coverage unless that employer does business with federal or state government projects. If I own a highway construction project in Texas, or if I own a highway construction company, I should say, in Texas, and I am working on a project that is federally funded, then I am required to have workers' compensation coverage. But if let's say I own a manufacturing facility in Texas that doesn't do any kind of government work, that doesn't have any kind of business relationship with the federal or state government, I don't have to carry workers' compensation coverage for my employers. I could do a whole lecture just talking about the pros and cons of this. One of the biggest negatives associated with these companies in Texas that don't require workers' compensation coverage, well, those employers aren't protected by workers' comp law. There are provisions in the law that protects employers. When the ownership does not provide the coverage, they're opening themselves up to multi-million-dollar lawsuits when an employee is injured. If I owned a company in Texas, even if I wasn't required to carry workers' compensation coverage, I would, because of the protections that it would provide me as an employer. Another example from a neighboring state, Kansas. Employers with gross payrolls less than $20,000 a year do not have to provide workers' compensation coverage. Now, if we look in more detail specifically at the Oklahoma coverage requirements, all employers with at least one part-time employee, employers who refuse to carry the coverage can be fined up to $1,000 per day, and this is in the guide to employers that I talked about previously. All of this is in that guide to employers, and I'm not going to read this to you because it is in that document. If you have any questions about these exceptions, let me know. Oh, and here's the agricultural exception in the state of Oklahoma. Agricultural operations with annual payroll less than $100,000 per year are exempt from this requirement to provide workers' compensation coverage to their employees. Again, there are several here. You can read through that guide to employers. Let me know if you have any questions. The guide also talks about the exemption for independent contractors. In the construction industry, we'll have a general contractor, and then we'll hire all these subcontractors that are independent contractors. As the general contractor, we do not have to provide workers' compensation coverage to those independent contractors. But what is an independent contractor? There can be some gray areas here, and there can be some companies that try to misuse this exemption. But an independent contractor, as defined by the state of Oklahoma, and this is in the guide, is independent of the general contractor or the owner of the project or the owner of the company that they're working with. And working with instead of for. An independent contractor works with the owner rather than working for the owner, if you want to think of it in those terms. The independent contractor normally will also work for other owners. They don't have an exclusive relationship just with one client. They have multiple clients. A roofing subcontractor, they don't just work for one general contractor. They may work for several general contractors. The independent contractor, that we're referring to here as a worker, has substantial control over the work process. They're given a job to do, then they are pretty much left to do that job however they see fit. They're not directly supervised on a day-to-day basis by the project owner or a general contractor. They have say-so in how the job gets done. A lot of times we can distinguish an independent contractor by the special skills or a license that they might hold. They're like an electrician. A licensed electrician. Oftentimes they will work as independent contractors for a lot of different clients. And part of what defines them as an independent contractor is their license to work as an electrician in the state of Oklahoma or whatever state they're in. Also, the independent contractor, also referred to here as the worker, supplies their own tools. And they may even supply many of the materials for the work they're doing. Now, if the owner is supplying all the tools and all the materials, that's a red flag that maybe that's not really an independent contractor. There's some other characteristics of an independent contractor in the guides that I've mentioned, but where this becomes important, why this is important. Some companies will try to loophole the workers' compensation requirements by trying to classify regular employees as independent contractors to avoid purchasing workers' compensation coverage. This is not going to work. On a very low level, some employers may get away with it, but for the most part, a company that's doing this will eventually suffer the legal consequences of trying to work through this loophole. Treat your employees. If they're employees, don't try to classify them as an independent contractor to avoid providing workers' compensation coverage. It's not going to work. If you end up, and you probably won't, most companies aren't going to try this. But let's say you do end up working with a company that tries to pull this stunt. That might be a company you don't want to work for very long. You might want to seek employment elsewhere, because if they're willing to manipulate and loophole the law in this area, they may be doing it in other areas as well. They probably don't have a very good safety culture either if they're trying to circumvent the laws in this way. So, but read those guides. That's going to provide additional information about Oklahoma coverage requirements. All right, I'm going to end this video with that point. When we come back, we'll talk about what we mean by workers' compensation being a no-fault system.